It is a chilly 64 degrees here in Portugal. Windy, damp. It feels 54. It's cold. I have a little windbreaker on and I'm cold. So this is like an AMOC summer here. We had a few days when it hit 84 degrees Fahrenheit. You know, the temperature has been between 16 and 24, basically, most of the summer so far. It's almost August. You know, it's just weather patterns shifting, or maybe it has to do with the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, AMOC, maybe. They say that if that slows radically or a lot, and it has been slowing, that will cool off Europe, and that northern Europe will become really, really cold. So, you know, climate change is complex. So there are a lot of moving parts. So places heat up and burn, and other places might cool down depending on what happens. But it's all radical change, and it's very fast. It happens very fast, which is the problem, because it's hard to adapt to it, even with our modern technology and industry and engineering and science and everything else. So, and also those things, modernity caused the problem in the first place. So every time we have a solution, it implies another problem to be solved. Not to mention the problems that we create just to solve for profits purposes. But anyway, I watched the Olympic Games opening ceremony, the whole thing. It was long. I was amazed. What was it, 4 hours or something? And there was a pre-show to it. I watched it on Max, HBO Max. Good coverage. It was a spectacle that I have not seen in my lifetime, an Olympic ceremony of that sort. It was very unique, with the boats going down the Seine and the tour of the city's hot spots by the hardcore runner who was wearing the fencing mask and the little costume. It was very interesting. Celine Dion, she's a trooper, a true diva. Despite her health problems, she did a great job at the end of it. It was emotionally satisfying. I love dancers. I love to dance, and I love dancers. And having dancers featured throughout was really exciting. I love plump Lady Gaga, so womanly and beautiful. She looked really soft and gorgeous, and she's a great entertainer anyway. But I like plump Lady Gaga as opposed to really, what do you call it? You know, slim, buff, pumped, cut Madonna, right? So she's just a natural woman, and she looks great. And that was fun. The music was nice, it was lovely, and the effect of the horse racing down the Seine towards the opening ceremony area by the Eiffel Tower was spectacular, wonderful effect. It lasted a little bit too long, though. I mean, I feel like I was watching that horse run down the Seine for an hour. It was surreal. But anyway, it was cool. It's not ironic, but it's interesting to me. Guy Debord, Society of the Spectacle, Situationist International in the 60s and 70s, writing about society and of the spectacle. And in Paris, there they are, creating one of the most amazing spectacles I've seen in a while. And it just reminds me that human beings can do things together that are pretty wonderful, beautiful, interesting, entertaining, and so on. And we don't have to spend all of our resources on the great game, which is all about controlling resources to control profits, to have power, greater agency and control over the world, and so on. It's sad. I personally, it seemed to me they dissed Israel a bit. They didn't mention Israel when the boat went by with the Israeli team. There was a Palestinian team, which was good. The whole thing with Belarus and Russia seems a bit odd, but of course you won't think so. And of course the neoliberal machine, GlobeCap's not going to think so. You know, it's an existential war going on now between BRICS or the South or whatever you want to call it. But the Olympics bureaucrat in charge, he said some nice things regarding unity and solidarity and things like that, which I appreciated greatly. Anyway, it was a good show. You know, they emphasized peace, which is important to me. I long for peacemakers. There aren't any on the docket right now in terms of leaders in the world coming along, especially not in the West. So it remains to be seen what the future holds, but hopefully this Olympics won't be marred by any, you know, terror attacks or any terrible vandalism or things like that. We don't need that right now. Let's just have a peaceful games, and hopefully in the future we'll resolve global conflicts over little things as we manage our resources better for posterity. Good news for 10-year-olds as opposed to for profits. And we'll solve our problems with sport, with honest competition where everybody obeys the same rules. So anyhow, enjoy the Olympics and have a nice weekend. When you go to little streets like this, run into dead ends, you can see a lot more wildlife. But I just find it interesting. I have to go back now. It just feels like I'm living, I don't know. In these places, I feel like it's 100 years ago. I hope I got my point across about Guy Debord and Society of the Spectacle. Everything in our world is spectacle. And it can be good spectacle, but it serves one purpose, basically. Bread and circuses. Okay, I want to put this as a supplement to what I said in the park. After I watched the Olympic opening ceremony, which I enjoyed, I watched the whole thing. I like the music and dancing, as I said. You know, there's been so much moral outrage. It's been called disgusting, outrageous. Even George Galloway went on a rant, mother of all talk shows, about how it demeaned French culture in so many ways. There's a big pushback because of the LGBTQ elements of it, drag queens, things like that, transsexuals. You know, they're screaming about, oh, there was children and transsexuals on the stage. So all of this kind of American-esque moral outrage. And of course, in the United States, it was bad. The Speaker of the House said last night's mockery of the Last Supper was shocking and insulting to Christian people around the world who watched the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games. The war on our faith and traditional values knows no bounds today, but we know the truth and virtue will always prevail. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5, the Bible. So anyway, I wonder what Jesus would have thought if you read the Beatitudes, but be that as it may, I'm more, in terms of virtue, I'm more of a Taoist or, Buddhist or, Beatitudes Jesus, Buddhist monk Jesus, Stoic than anything else, Stoic virtues and so on. But anyway, they have their way of looking at things, and I didn't even notice it, to be honest. Maybe that's because I spent too much time in big cities like San Francisco and Tokyo and so on. So it didn't bother me that much. I've noticed over my lifetime a lot of people making images that look like the Last Supper. And, whatever. I mean, who knows what the Last Supper looked like? It comes from a painting. It's an idealized fantasy version of an event that's probably fictionalized, obviously fictionalized. But, that doesn't mean there isn't truth to it, that Jesus of Nazareth or Jesus of Bethlehem or Jesus of wherever didn't have a Last Supper with his disciples at some time. The historicity of the Bible is in question, obviously, but for many people, they believe the literal truth of the Bible. The only problem I have with that is that a literal truth, how many ways can that be interpreted? How many ways is that interpreted across denominations? What is the literal truth of the Bible? Well, my pastor told me what it was. Who reads it deeply, puts it in historical context, understands literary criticism, and then meditates on it and philosophizes on it and comes up with their own interpretation. I imagine that any prophet, self-proclaimed prophet, would do that, and then he or she would decide what interpretation was best. And then they would tell their flock, and then the flock would believe it, because human beings are true believers. So, the Guardian apology follows anger among Catholics and other groups at opening ceremony segment that resembled biblical scene. It was different, the opening ceremony. Hindu Times is all over it. They call it blasphemous. It was hyper-sexualized. Oh, man, I don't know. I mean, look around the world, and people, blame people for all kinds of sexual misconduct, but it's everywhere all the time. That's not to justify it, but everybody falls prey to it one way or another, victimized by it or not victims of it, just sexually active in some way. I don't know. You can blame Scott Ritter for his problem and then not blame Clinton because Clinton's your guy or whatever. Epstein, who cares? I don't like this guy. He did something naughty on the web, so he's discredited for all time. But anyway, we have a sliding scale constantly changing about, the hysteria. We invest in various sexual things. It reminds me of burning Beatles records, They're satanic. The Beatles are satanic. So anyway, at one time, that's what they did. So Baptist News had a piece that was kind of well thought through and fair. But again, the blasphemy word is quoted. And there's 1 billion people in the world that are Christians, so you insulted all of them. Yeah, well, what kind of Christian are they? The forgiving kind or the kind that say it has to look like this painting? Jesus needs to be a Western European Jesus, not a Middle Eastern Jesus with genes very much totally similar to Palestinians. Anyway, Public Religion Research Institute found Republicans are 2.5 times more likely than Democrats to support political violence. So I don't know. A direct undercutting of God's design, some people say. You owe the West an apology. Andy Stanley. LGBTQ people, given his willingness to host the Unconditional Conference in 2023, despite being accused at Christian Today of seriously undermining a New Testament sexual ethic and sending people to hell. So, if you support people's right to do what they want to do, in private, among their loved ones, you're going to hell, of course. That's an old story. Their final prayers were to the God whose son you mocked in front of the entire world, he wrote. You don't just owe Christians an apology, you owe the West an apology. So again, it's the West. As if the West isn't just riddled with sin from day one. If you study history, for God's sake, And don't say Nazis didn't use religion or have agreements with the Pope back in World War II. So Glenn Packham, he's a popular pastor and songwriter. And he tried to clarify. I'm not surprised or even offended. We know what the world does, but I think reading the cultural moment is a key to living faithfully as Christians within it. That's one reason to offer a comment. If mockery was the goal, it's nothing new. It happened to Jesus, and he said it would happen to his followers. But nothing is more scornful than a crucified God. And God lowered himself to that depth willingly. He did it for us. If a statement of belonging was the goal, subverting a Christian symbol for a modern message, then it's fascinating that there's no more powerful symbol than Jesus's table. So he's got a much more moderate liberal view. I think it was meant to be some sort of creative mashup. The halo around the central figure and her placement in the middle is at the very least a nod. It's then a pagan Last Supper of sorts with Dionysus presiding and perversions abounding. So you have problems with Dionysus and Jesus, Just think of ancient Greece's influence over the region during Jesus Christ's period of history. When the world acts like the world, Christians being surprised when the world acts like the world is always interesting to me. This is Derwin Gray. He's a pastor of Transformation Church just outside Charlotte. As a follower of Jesus, I'm more concerned about the evils of sexual abuse in the church, leadership corruption, greed, sexual immorality, Christless preaching, poor discipleship, and political idolatry than I am unbelievers mocking the Christian faith at the Olympic ceremony. And I suppose a lot of Christians think, you're an unbeliever, you're going to hell anyway. Why should I care what you do? We're Christians, we know better. So, he's got a interesting perspective. So the spectrum of responses, according to this article in Baptist News, denouncing the Olympic Committee for mocking Jesus and undercutting God's design. Again, a lot of people think they know exactly what God wants based on reading ancient texts. Naming this moment as a cause for sheer horror. Condemning it as pornography and calling it Babylon. I wonder what they know about Babylon, really, other than some references in the Bible. Archaeology, anthropology, and history don't come into it. Next, claiming it's the moral equivalent of marital abuse. calling for an apology to the West, accusing France of using vulgarity to mock Christianity, doubling down with logic about faithfulness, admitting it wasn't totally about Christianity while calling it a mashup, deleting the post upon further reflection, encouraging Christians not to be surprised, pointing the church's attention to abuses in the church. So there you go. So who is Babylon? It goes on. I think this is an interesting article. I'll put it in the description. It's from the Baptist News, and honestly, a lot of Christian newspapers are really good. They have really good editorials, they have good reporting, and they're not what you think. They're not trying to convert you all the time. It's not like fire and brimstone. So it's called Offense Taken, Parsing the Uproar Over the Olympics Opening Ceremony. It's a good article. So who's running? So George Galloway of Moats or Moats, I don't know how you pronounce it, the mother of all talk shows, went on a tirade for 16 minutes. Oh, well, I think it was 10 minutes of a 16-minute piece. He went on a tirade about how France has lost its cultural status. You know, it's really, really lost it. And other people on the web, I noticed, were pissed off about the horse running down the river and angry with Lady Gaga. You know, they could find much to criticize. The balloon was a bad idea. You know, so I don't know. A lot of people liked it, I'm sure. I didn't mind it. I liked it. And other people were outraged, but that's the times we live in. You can go on the internet and find any opinion you want to hear in an instant and join in the outrage and the upset and the self-righteousness and the moral superiority with your friends. So I wanted to add that to my comments about how I felt about the opening ceremony. And remember, again, I'll reiterate that, you know, these spectacles are there to keep us from noticing the things that we should pay attention to, which, in my opinion, are world peace, disarmament, getting rid of nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction, tackling the problem of carbon emissions or emissions from modern technological industrial civilization so that we can have a future. Good news for 10-year-olds, as Eric Lee says. Or, you know, this grotesque inequality that causes people so much anger and pain and suffering. And just taking care of the ecosystem, the biosphere, you know, protecting the oceans and so on, so that, you know, we can live a healthy life and have a future. For other people who don't care about a future the way I do, that's okay. I mean, you just get busy making money and doing whatever you want to do. Surviving, obviously, people who need to survive and do terrible things to survive. I'm not criticizing anyone for trying to survive. But anyway, we have important things to do, and that involves peacemaking and getting along with one another and understanding one another. And in a Stoic and Taoist kind of way, understanding that different strokes for different folks is a thing among the Homo sapien animal. We are not ants. We think. We have different preferences, different ways of living, and so on. And I think it's better to try to understand one another's way of life and appreciate it and respect it than to fear it and make war on it and be outraged by it. And I would really sit very carefully when you're praying at church and really ask yourself, what do you think Jesus would do? Put yourself in Joshua's shoes. Forget about the church, your preacher. Read it, the Bible if you want to, but meditate on it and try to interpret it for yourself. What do you think it's really saying? And then if you have the fortitude or the gumption or the intellectual energy left over, you could study history, study literary criticism, understand the literature of the ages, understand archaeology, anthropology, some various sciences, even psychology. Hard sciences are fine too, obviously. Social sciences are more difficult. But you could, delve into that to try to understand what makes human beings so special, so different, so unique, so damn dangerous. And, live and let live, learn how to love each other. I think when I think about Buddhist Jesus, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be blasphemous, but my Jesus is a loving, forgiving Jesus who gets along with nature. That's how I interpret what I want to interpret of Jesus Christ's teachings in the Beatitudes in the New Testament. I think the Bible is interesting, but I'm not really an Old Testament type of guy. The wrathful God to me is just a bitch king who hates people and wants power, So I don't want to criticize the New Testament. I know it's a profound document, books of books, but I'm not really a wrathful God type person. I don't believe in hell. I don't think you're condemned because you were born into different circumstances or had a different life experiences and opportunities and so on. I think that's just wrong. So maybe I'm wrong about that, but I've tried over the years to understand why people have these absolutist beliefs and why they're so angry with one another and vengeful and hateful. And I just haven't been able to get there. I can't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't have the right gene or something. I've traveled a lot as I've said many times, and getting along with people, respecting people, appreciating their culture, their way of doing things has always been good to me on so many levels. It wasn't an act, it was genuine, and I think people understood that and treated me well. So there's that. So yeah, think about it. And still, the Olympic Games is full of good sportsmanship and brilliant people who work really, really hard to be good at their sport. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a peaceful event among all of our nations where we can learn about one another, respect one another, look at each other as human beings, not as enemies. I really wish Belarus and Russia were allowed in. I know for a lot of people in the West, they're evil. I'm going to talk about the deep state again later in terms of candidates, who's deep state, who isn't. I think they all are. But anyway, the point is mainstream corporatists, fascists, and so on need enemies. They run on enemies. Without them, they're nothing. So you have to, have some countries out there that you're against. I'm against that mentality and philosophy and ideology completely. So call me a peacenik or whatever, a pacifist. Yes, I would fight for my friends and family, but I wouldn't fight for corporate profits ever. I've read Schmedley. I think he was brilliant for his time. He was amazing. And, war is a racket. It's a disgusting racket. I would be much more morally outraged about what's going on in the Middle East and in Ukraine and around the world in the Congo and other places than I would about a bunch of transsexuals and transvestites, walking up and down a stage on the Olympic opening ceremonies. So anyway, this kind of thing happens all the time. It's nothing new. We've seen it our whole life, for decades. This kind of moral outrage, panic over Satanism and so on. It comes to naught. It never really gets us anywhere. It doesn't help us at all. The kind of enmity that Donald Trump preaches isn't going to help people. It's not going to help Republicans, conservatives. It's not going to help MAGA people. It's just going to create more chaos. And but people thrive sometimes in chaos, and they thrive on enmity in a weird way. I don't understand it. Gorka and some of Trump's supporters constantly talk about fentanyl and so on, coming from across the border, from China or whatever. They never discuss why people take drugs. What's the cause of the pathology? What are the complex causes, both social and individual, medical, and so on, of these habits, addictions? Why does America demand so many drugs? It's a free market. They want to consume them. They never ask those questions because it doesn't serve their purpose, which is just to win, to beat the other side. And people like Gorka, they're just entertainers. They make money spouting some absolutist ideological garbage. But anyway, I'm spinning out of control now, so I'll stop. Yeah, meditate on it. Let's try to understand, what our Jesus would be like, and take it from there. William T. out.